Good day and welcome to another edition of Theology Thursday, a weekly video where I cover a theological or biblical topic. One of the hot issues for a number of years now in the United States and has become kind of a hot button issue even now in a number of other countries, particularly European countries, is the issue of immigration and the issue of securing the borders. Matter of fact, in my lifetime, it seems like for decades, people have talked about securing the border, securing the border. So that raises the question, is there anything in the Bible about immigration? Is there anything in the Bible about foreigners? Is there anything in the Bible about borders? Is this just a human construct that has arisen in history and is a political, national issue, but not really a biblical issue? I think that is a legitimate question. I want to attempt to answer that today. So two things we need to understand first before we actually look at what the biblical text says. In the ancient world, things were very different, very, very much different. Almost everybody was agrarian. What they call a city, up until late in the Old Testament, most cities, especially like in the land of Israel, would have had a few hundred people and that's it. You don't have, when I think of a city, I live in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and we got millions of people that live here. I live in a small town outside of Phoenix called Casa Grande, but it still has like 80,000 people. And there was really almost nothing like that for the most part in the ancient world. So most of the people lived on the family farm. So you have a few artisans, like professionals, military leaders, government officials, religious leaders that would have populated the cities. You have then the majority of people that live and work on the family farm. But then you also had groups of people who were nomads. Abraham spends most of his life as one of these. They would move into an area normally looking for pasture land. And they had large flocks and herds. And so oftentimes what they would do is they would exchange some of their animals for vegetables and things from local people that live there. So it was kind of good for everybody. And oftentimes these nomads brought news of what was going on in the world. Sometimes they were also connected with trade, so they might have their flocks and herds. Plus, they would have things to trade that they had picked up in other nations and had brought with them. So these are the kind of people normally called foreigners in the Old Testament. We also have people in biblical times, like in modern times, who are displaced. And people are displaced for one of three reasons, much like in modern times. One of them would have been economic. Because most people were family farmers, during extended times of drought, sometimes you had to pack up and move and look for some place where you could survive. And we even read about some of those in the Bible. Sometimes you had to move because of political situation. There might be a political oppression or something, and for your own safety and that of your family, you need to leave. And then oftentimes there were people who were displaced because of military incursions. And today, we use the word refugee to describe these people who have been displaced due to military engagements. So we need to count that's the world that they mostly lived in. The second thing we need to know is kind of sort of the way the Bible runs historically. We have creation. We have Adam and Eve fall. They sin. It's Genesis 3. Then we have their family kind of run out in chapter 4. In chapter 5, we'll get sort of a list of people, and the earth is getting more and more populated. And then people are just as wicked as you could possibly imagine. And so God sends the flood, and that actually takes up about 4 chapters, Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9. So after the flood, there were some environmental changes, obviously, some of which, believe it or not, we still, I think, feel the effects of today. There have been a massive amount of volcanic activity. The seabeds arose probably pretty violently. That's where we get the fountains of the deep breaking up. Much of the earth would have been a lot lower than it is now. So we have a lot of mountain forming during the flood. It's called cross-bedding, as you get a lot of sedimentation and the movement of the water and it being deposited. And then afterwards, we have tectonic plate activity as well. which creates lots of volcanoes. A lot of moisture in the air would have created the ice age. and so on and so forth. So anyway, we have all of that. So that's sort of the physical results. But then what happens after Noah is we discover some interesting information in Genesis 10. So Genesis 10, after the flood, as the waters have receded and all of that, it says, these are generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. So Noah has 3 sons. They're married. So we have 8 people on the ark. Noah and Mrs. Noah, the 3 sons and their wives. And so afterwards, now they begin having children. So we get the sons of Japheth. And we get this list. Gomez, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Targamath. The sons of Jovan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodamim. From these, the coastland peoples spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans in their nations. Now, they're not going to spread out until Genesis 11 at the Tower of Babel. The Genesis 10 kind of is going to project out where they're going to go. And so it's after the flood, we find them with their own languages and their own geographical area, their own land and borders. And this is where we find the beginning of nations. Now, the reason this is important is because this is God's work, meaning that nations and borders are a part of what God put into place. Now, eventually, he's going to raise up a new nation called Israel, the descendants of Abraham, and they'll have borders as well. God gives to Israel, he tells them in Deuteronomy, actually Exodus, it tells Abraham, and then it's repeated in Exodus, repeated in Deuteronomy, and we find it again in Joshua, where they are given boundaries to what their land would be. So what we find in Scripture is that nations are something that God created, that borders are something that God instituted, that there are people that live within these nations, and you are to respect one another's borders. So the idea of a nation having a sense of sovereignty, this is our nation, these are our geographical borders, and having the right to defend those borders is very scriptural. However, I would remind you that there were nomadic people in those days, there were people that were displaced, and the Bible in Deuteronomy gives very specific, and in Leviticus as well, very specific instructions about if these people have been displaced and they have no land anymore, they've been run out by someone else, you should take them in. You should care for them because you used to be without a land when you were in bondage in Egypt. So how does that translate over to the modern world? Well, obviously, there are nations, there are borders. God instituted this. Nations have the right to define their borders, to protect their borders from invasions, whether that's a military invasion or just an invasion of lots of people coming in. But at the same time, particularly for those of us that are Christians, we recognize that there are people who are genuine refugees and that we should do what we can to help care for them. Now, the ultimate goal, just like it was in Scripture, is for them to at some point return back to their land. That someday they'll be able to retake their land and they'll be able to go back. This happens to Israel. They get taken to Babylon, but eventually they make their return. They come back. That is the kind of really the idea. And so when we hear, politicians, I'm always thinking in terms of how does this square with Scripture? The idea of protecting our borders, particularly against criminals making their way in, is very, very biblical. That's no different than you having your house and protecting you and your family from criminals. So that idea of borders and protection and preservation is certainly very, very biblical. But there are people who find themselves with nowhere to go and are looking for a homeland, someplace they can stay, maybe even it's only temporarily. And as believers, we want to minister to those people. Now, our ultimate goal is to help them resettle in their land, not just to relocate them. But we have lots of opportunities to minister to them. But I know this is it can be a really touchy and delicate subject, but we do have to recognize that borders were established by God, nations were established by God, and nations have sovereignty over their borders. There's no dispute that that is scriptural. Where we sometimes begin to have some issues is determining who's legitimately a refugee, a displaced person, and how can we help them while still maintaining our own sovereignty and borders. So I'll just give an example from my own life, just kind of show you how this works. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, the United States government put a lot of the Vietnamese refugees in my hometown in Arkansas. These were people, a lot of them were orphans. Parents put their kids on these boats, and these boats tried to escape as the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, came in and took the South. And they had nowhere to go, especially those that had helped Americans and had fought valiantly to defend their land from the encroachment of communism from North Vietnam. And so many of them are on these boats. Again, many of them were orphans. So what do you do with them? Just let them drown in the ocean, send them back when they know they're going to be executed? So the United States government took many of them in as refugees and settled many of them in my hometown. So I had kind of firsthand knowledge of this. You know, there were three brothers that I became friends with who were orphans living in an orphanage in my hometown, a Catholic orphanage in my hometown, who were Vietnamese and had escaped the Viet Cong coming in. Their parents had been killed, and they were tossed on a boat basically, and just fighting for survival. And so Pa, Phu, and Pho, three brothers, that I became friends with. So those are situations where you have desperate people, and we as believers in particular want to reach out and help and minister to them. And so it's not a, shut all the borders down, don't let anybody in. Sometimes we need to take in people that are refugees, but we're wanting to minister to them, not just let them come in unvetted and potential criminals. And, we can't just be overrun with people. Like, there is some common sense that goes with it as well, and some scriptural, being careful about your borders. Even Jacob said, man, I'm a stranger, I'm a foreigner in this land, I'm a guest. So we need to behave ourselves very carefully, lest they kick us out. So there was a recognition that you need to be a contributor to where you go, not a problem or a drain where you go. So again, I know it's a hot topic, but I just wanted to kind of really focus on the bigger picture, that when we talk about nations and boundaries and borders, that this is biblical. God is the one who instituted nations in in Genesis chapter 10. But he's also the God who said we need to care for the downtrodden and the oppressed and the displaced, and minister to them to help them get up and get going again, and hopefully be able someday to return to their own land and make that a better place to live for others as well. So I hope this helps you a little bit understand all of that, and I hope you have a great day. God bless you.